We've got a great guest for you guys. His name is James Galbraith. He holds the Lloyd Benson Chair in Government Business Relations at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. And his new book is The Predator State, How Conservatives Abandoned the Free Market and Why Liberals Should Too. James, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you.
Now, you wrote a piece for the Washington Monthly called No Return to Normal. First, let me ask you about that. Are these banks in reality insolvent and bankrupt?
Well, that's a judgment for the professional regulators, but I think that at the very least they're deeply troubled. And that means that we ought to be taking a much more aggressive role to protect the public interest than we have been.
And how would we be aggressive like that?
Well, when a bank is on the verge of failure, when it has failed in that sense, what the normal procedure is for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to send in a team of regulators. They replace the existing management, and they start a process of getting a clean audit of the bank's books so that we know what assets are likely to recover value and what are not. And at the same time, you guarantee the deposits so that there isn't a panic, and you keep the bank open for normal business. But you avoid taking any extra risk, and you try to minimize any additional losses that might eventually be charged to the taxpayers in the Deposit Insurance Fund. And that step, of course, is being evaded at the moment by in the Treasury's plan for the big banks.
So why do you think the Treasury is not going in that direction?
Well, big banks are very powerful. They're very influential. And beyond that, I think the Treasury feels there is a feeling in these circles that confuses the big banks with the effective functioning of the financial system as a whole, and I think fails to recognize that you can always replace a bank. If a bank has failed, the most important thing is to get it out of the way as quickly as possible, and let other financial institutions just take on the functions and the roles that bank was particularly performing. But we're going to need, in any event, in the wake of this enormous hyperinflation of a bubble over the last decade in the housing sector, to have a smaller financial sector going forward. So the question is not whether we're going to take some losses in the banking sector, but whether they're going to fall on the institutions that actually caused the problem, or whether they're going to fall on other institutions, smaller ones for the most part, that weren't involved, practically speaking.
Professor Galbraith, here's the thing. Everybody thinks, look, President Obama's really smart. He's got to be on top of this. And a lot of people criticize us for some of the things we say on the show or that I write. And they say, look, well, how do you know better than President Obama? And he must have considered all of this. And there must be a reason why he's decided against it, that if all the banks go under at the same time, that would cause some sort of systemic problem that I cannot grasp. How true is that?
Well, the banks don't need to disappear abruptly. You can avoid the systemic problem by, first of all, using the powers that the FDIC has to insure deposits and to prevent a run, and secondly, by keeping the basic institutions, the institutional infrastructure, up and running under federal supervision. And that is what is typically done when a bank, even when a non-systemic bank fails. There's no particular reason to think that the system would be endangered by an aggressive effort to find out what the extent of the losses actually are. Now, what would happen, of course, is that a lot of people who have put capital at risk and didn't supervise, didn't really pay attention to what was being done with that capital would lose it. That's appropriate in a capitalist system, and the incumbent management would be replaced, and that's no big tragedy. There are lots of capable bankers out there, but what you need to have when you intervene in a financial institution is to have a team in place which is not wedded to the particular corporate strategies of the previous team, and that therefore can give you an accurate and clean audit, an evaluation of what the bank condition actually is, and reestablish confidence going forward.
talking to James Galbraith. He's the author of The Predator State and is at the University of Texas as well. And Professor Galbraith, I want to get to this idea that we've been discussing on the show for a while of the naked CDSs and whether they are really just gambling and not attached to underlying assets, and if so, whether we even have to pay those obligations. So first, do I have it right? Is it simply gambling without underlying assets, what they call naked credit default swaps?
Well, a credit default swap, I think, is naked in its nature. It's an insurance policy which is not backed up by any reserves and it's not regulated in any market. And so, yes, it's gambling. You don't have to be involved. You don't have to be to own the asset that's being insured, to have it be any way related to it. You're basically just gambling on some event that's happening somewhere in the world at some particular time.
So, I mean, we're not misunderstanding because we're laymen, right? It's these guys say, all right, I think that batch of mortgages or loans, et cetera, I'll take the side that they're going to go under, and you'll take the side that they're not, and we'll just put, a $10 billion bet on it. And that's
correct, yes, that's the way it works.
All right, now, and that's unregulated.
Yes.
And Alan Greenspan today comes out and writes an editorial saying that we have enough regulation, that's not the problem. How can he say that in good conscience?
I couldn't say it in good conscience.
I mean, look, I read that editorial, Professor Galbraith, and I think, is it possible that Alan Greenspan doesn't know a damn thing? Or is he complicit and he thinks, yeah, I know, we robbed them, but so what? And, if we don't have any more regulation, we'll rob them again, and that's good for me.
Alan Greenspan was, of course, all his life an objectivist, a believer in one of the most extreme variants of the free market philosophy. I think it's very hard for him to give that up. But the reality is, of course, that he presided over a vast deregulation and a vast desupervision of the financial system. And we now understand, the rest of us understand what the consequences of that are. So what Alan Greenspan thinks about it, or claims to think about it, I think is of no longer any great interest.
Right, except in giving out responsibility, because I think that's important. So that
yes, from our point of view, yes. But yes. I mean, what he says, I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to parse it at this stage.
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So this credit default swaps that are naked and that are gambling, etc. Let's get to the more interesting idea that Elliot Spitzer actually suggested recently, which is, hey, wait a minute. Now, if these are based on nothing and they're just gambling debts, why are we using taxpayer money to pay them off?
Well, it's a very good question. It's a very good question. And the issue of how enforceable these contracts would be, I think, is an issue which may well be worth testing. Going forward, the best opinion that I'm familiar with is that they should be banned. These are instruments which basically didn't exist before the turn of this decade. They were legitimized by a law slipped into an appropriations bill at the 11th hour in December of 2000, just as Congress was leaving, just after Gore v. Bush was decided. But the bill was written by Phil Gramm, or anyway, sponsored by him. Nobody knew that it was there inside an 11,000-page appropriations bill. And they basically opened the financial system to this kind of rampant spreading and interlinking of systemic risk, and that's basically what the CDS market does. There was a theory put about it that it would enable people to protect themselves from risk, but in fact what it did was to tie the risk of every part of the system together and to transfer risk from one party to another in a way that nobody could trace or understand. And that meant that the whole system, of course, is implicated in the disaster.
Now let me take it to another level. And we're talking to Professor James Galbraith. He's the Lloyd Benson Chair at the University of Texas. He's the author of The Predator State, and I think one of the top economists in the country. And if this CDS market is worth $64 trillion, and now the whole world economy, the whole world GDP might not be worth that much, and certainly the United States GDP is not worth that much. It's a little over $14 trillion. So obviously, if they had a systemic problem in the CDSs, which they did, is that possibly causing the whole thing? I mean, could it be that the toxic assets, the ones that, the bad mortgages, the subprimes, et cetera, are actually not that big a deal, but that the real problem is in these CDSs?
In other words, if you got rid of the CDSs, you wouldn't have a problem? I'm not sure about that.
Not that you wouldn't have a problem, but that you would have a manageable problem.
I think the right analysis is that it amplifies and transfers the problem. So whereas with the subprime securities and the mortgage-backed securities that are out there in the system, you've got a big problem, and you basically know where the risk is. The CDS markets enable that risk to be transferred basically anywhere on the planet, and you don't know until an institution goes down and the contracts are called who else is exposed. And that was, of course, what happened with AIG. It was the government was caught basically flat-footed when, I guess it was Lehman Brothers bankruptcy triggered the CDSs that AIG had issued.
So, I'm trying to get a handle on whether if you had an honest broker come in at the Treasury, which I'm not sure we have one there, and looked at this stuff and said, hey, look, wait a minute now. I can wall this off here, and these are real mortgages that went under, and there's real assets there, and it affects the economy, and we got to take care of that. And then you have these other toxic assets that are, insurance based on that, but that insurance made sense, et cetera. And then you have a whole other category, these gambling debts, these naked CDSs, et cetera. And we don't really need to pay those because, yeah, there's a winner and if there's a loser, there's a winner. But why are we taking taxpayer money to pay off Goldman Sachs or some hedge fund when we got much bigger problems? We got to deal with problems that actually affect the country. Like, we might get to those, and if there's enough money, et cetera, and it makes sense, then maybe we pay those off with whatever profits they have from other parts of their company, AIG, et cetera. But would that be the right analysis? Can that be done?
From a legal standpoint, I'm not sure, but from an economic standpoint, I think that is essentially correct. That the people who have money coming to them would be lucky to get away with cents on the dollar, because after all, there's no way that these obligations can be paid in a general recognition of the losses that are going to be there in the underlying assets. And it has to be said that the subprime securities, the most important thing to do right now is to face up to what those things actually are. And everything I see, everything I hear about, evidence is so far is certainly far from being complete. But all the indications are that the securities that were based upon subprime mortgages are massively problematic. They are based upon mortgages that were issued fraudulently. They were based on fraudulent appraisals that were inadequately documented, that were in every way, and in fact would be extremely difficult to enforce, actually, as valid contracts in a court of law. In addition to that, it's very difficult to know who actually holds the mortgage. So the word I'm getting, the advice I'm getting, is that the underlying securities, there's a reason why the market won't pay anything for those underlying securities, which is that from a legal standpoint, they are just terrifically problematic. And the Treasury plan basically treats them as though they were valid assets that were simply under a cloud of suspicion in the marketplace, a cloud of fear that will evaporate, and when confidence returns, these assets will regain value. But I think there is very good reason to believe that they are, in fact, permanently impaired. And the net of the Treasury's plan is simply to transfer them from the books of the banks, which were and are responsible for the debacle, to the books of the FDIC and ultimately to the taxpayer. And that would basically be granting those parts of the financial institution, of the financial sector, which caused the problem, a free pass on trillions of dollars worth of disasters.
So, let's look at this in the totality of all the bailouts. On the one hand, President Obama comes out today and says, "Hey, UAW, you better watch it. We got to cut your salaries, and you might not even have your pensions." Now, those were contracts too, And in fact, those people relied on their pensions for their whole lives. And they didn't do anything wrong. So on the one hand, we're very eager and have no problems ripping up their contracts. But on the other hand, we have these guys who went on a gambling spree and that now tell us, oh, no, you don't understand. Our contracts are rock solid. And it appears that we've already funneled $13 billion over to Goldman Sachs through AIG on some of these bets that perhaps should have either not been paid or, as you pointed out, get pennies on the dollar. So when you look at that, you wonder about who's in the government.
And is there any wonder people are angry? Yeah. People are angry, and they have every right to be angry.
So why is Obama not looking out for us? Didn't we elect him for that? I mean, but that's a real fundamental question, and I'm not asking you to look into his psyche, right? But what I'm asking is an economic question. There's got to be some reason he's thinking, well, yeah, okay, all of that is true, but what is that but? I can't understand it.
Neither can I. To be quite honest with you, neither can I. I do think that the team immediately surrounding Obama is not broadly drawn enough so that if the debate, the discussion that we're having is being held inside the White House in similar terms, we're certainly not hearing about it on the outside. And I suspect there is basically that too many of the people who are making these policies are too close to the center of the financial system and too much in awe of the big institutions. And they're basically unwilling to recognize that there's a fundamental choice that has to be made between some very powerful companies and very powerful people associated with those companies and the larger public interest and the larger interest of the economy. And until that choice is made, policy decisions are not going to be conducive to a rapid recovery of the economy, to dealing with the enormous problems that people are facing as a result of this collapse.
We're talking to Professor Galbraith. He's the author of The Predator State. And, Professor, I got one last question for you. And that is the idea of what's coming up ahead. Do we have any indication that, okay, the money's already going out the door and every day it goes out more, but do we have any indication that we're going to get it right going forward? Have they had a discussion that you've heard of that coming out of the Obama administration about what regulations to pass to say, hey, you know what, this leveraging 30 to 1, 35 to 1, we're going to cut that out. Or, the board of directors, seems to be a circle where they go around and they're not really looking out for the shareholders. We got the rating agencies problems where they're putting AAA stamps on things that are garbage. I mean, we have a whole host of things that need to be addressed, it seems to me, right away. But I have not really seen any indication yet. But I very well might be missing. That's why I'm asking you. Have you seen any positive indications in that regard?
Yeah, to close on an optimistic or a hopeful note, I thought that Secretary Geithner, in speaking to the Congress yesterday, gave a very clear and very exact statement of the breadth of the problem. And he spoke about the extent to which consumers took out mortgages that they didn't understand, that were essentially fraudulently originated. And he spoke about the extent to which there was fraud throughout the system. So we shall see. I think there is a clear case for a very, very broad overhaul of the financial system, and the Treasury is talking about bringing institutions which have escaped regulation under a regulatory umbrella. But the really key issue here is, first of all, are we going to recognize the extent of the extent to which fraud suffused the activities of institutions that are now being protected, in effect, by the Treasury's plans? And are we going to call the people who were responsible for that to account and deal with that in a way which will restore confidence in the system, not by pretending that everything can be made all right, but by facing up to the problems and dealing with them and making it clear that the sheriff has arrived and that the kinds of abuses that were encouraged and tolerated in the Bush administration are going to be prosecuted and proscribed in this one. once that happens, you will really have turned a corner. But I don't think we're there yet.
Professor Galbraith, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you one quick question here. If you could pick one person that you would say, hey, President Obama, you would be really well served to listen to his economic thoughts here to diversify your the advice that you're getting, who would that be?
It would be someone you might have heard of, and his name is William K. Black, and he was a regulator, an economist, a criminologist, the person who understood what happened in the savings and loans in the 1980s first, and probably better than anybody else, and someone who actually advised the Obama campaign as well, so he's known to them. The author of a very, very good book on banking fraud entitled The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. And once you get a grip on that, you're getting somewhere.
Oh, I think that title says it all. And, of course, James Galbraith's book is The Predator State, and we'll put that up on the Young Turks library at theyoungturks.com. Professor Galbraith, it's been a real pleasure, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.